I never thought the day I broke my hip would be the day I felt utterly invisible to the people I loved most. When I called my son, hoping for comfort, he said, "Mom, I'm at my mother-in-law's party. Just send me a message if she passes away." That sentence crashed through me like a cold wave in the dead of winter. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Dorothy, and at 76 years old, I never imagined I would find myself lying on my kitchen floor in Queens, staring at the cracked ceiling of my rent-stabilized apartment, unable to move. The sharp pain in my hip felt like lightning shooting down my leg. I had been reaching for my favorite coffee mug, the one with faded roses that my late husband gave me 30 years ago. In that moment, as I lay there helpless, I thought someone would come. Someone would care. I was wrong. The smell of Mrs. Chen's dumplings from next door wafted through my thin walls, mixing with the distant sounds of car horns and children playing in the courtyard below. Queens has always been a symphony of cultures, languages, and dreams. I had lived in this same apartment for 43 years, watching the neighborhood transform around me. The bodega on the corner changed hands 3 times. The old Jewish bakery became a halal market. The Italian family downstairs moved to Long Island. But I remained, like an old tree rooted in concrete, believing that staying put meant staying connected to the people I loved. How foolish I was. When I finally managed to crawl to my phone, a journey that took 23 minutes and left me sobbing from pain, I called Michael first, my eldest son, the one I had nursed through pneumonia when he was 7, the one whose college tuition I paid by working double shifts at the department store, the one who promised me, with tears in his eyes at his father's funeral, that I would never be alone. "Mom?" His voice sounded distracted, annoyed even. I could hear laughter and music in the background. "Michael, I fell. I think I broke something. I can't get up." "Hold on a second." I heard him move away from the noise. "Sorry, what happened?" "I fell in the kitchen. My hip. I need help." There was a pause. A long, cold pause that stretched like a chasm between us. "Mom, I'm at Linda's mother's birthday party. It's really important. Can you call 911 or something? Just send me a message if she passes away, okay? I'll call you tomorrow." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my shaking hands, wondering if I had imagined those words. If she passes away. As if I were already a corpse to him. As if my pain, my fear, my desperate need for my child was nothing more than an inconvenience interrupting his social calendar. The fluorescent kitchen light hummed above me, casting harsh shadows across the linoleum floor where I lay. I could see dust bunnies under my refrigerator, a spider web in the corner I had been meaning to clean. Suddenly, all the small failures of my daily routine seemed enormous. Had I become so insignificant that even my own son saw me as disposable? I called my daughter Susan next. Surely she would be different. "Hi, Mom, can you make it quick? I'm at yoga class." "Susan, I'm hurt. I fell, and I think I broke my hip." "Oh no, that's terrible. Did you call Michael? He's busy. Can you come help me?" Another pause. I heard her instructor in the background talking about breathing and letting go of negativity. How ironic. "Mom, I'm in Manhattan. It would take me 2 hours to get to Queens in this traffic. Maybe call Mrs. Martinez upstairs? Or that lady from the senior center? I'm calling my daughter because I need my family." I know, but realistically, Mom, what can I do that a paramedic can't? I'll visit you in the hospital tomorrow, I promise." Another dial tone. Another rejection. I lay there for another hour before I finally called 911 myself. The paramedics were kind, professional. They lifted me onto a stretcher with more gentleness than my own children had shown me in years. As they carried me past the neighbors' doors, I saw Mrs. Martinez peek through her peephole. She had more concern in her eyes than my son had in his voice. At the hospital, they confirmed what I already knew. Fractured hip, surgery required, recovery time, 6 to 8 weeks. When they asked who my emergency contact was, I gave them Michael's number out of habit. But I knew, even as I spoke those digits, that he wouldn't be the one holding my hand through the long, frightening hours ahead. Let me tell you about the sacrifices. The endless, bottomless well of giving that had defined my life for 50 years. Maybe then you'll understand why that phone call cut so deep. I was 19 when I married Robert. We were poor but happy, living in a tiny studio in Astoria. When Michael was born, I worked nights at the hospital cafeteria while pursuing my nursing degree. Robert worked construction during the day. We barely slept, but we dreamed big dreams for our son. When Susan came along 3 years later, I dropped out of school. Someone had to stay home. Someone had to sacrifice. Robert's back gave out when he was 45. 20 years of carrying heavy materials, climbing scaffolding, pushing his body beyond its limits. The workers' compensation barely covered our rent. So I took on more hours, more jobs. I cleaned offices at dawn, worked retail during the day, and did bookkeeping for small businesses at night. My hands were raw from bleach and my feet ached constantly, but our children never went without. When Michael wanted to study business at NYU, the tuition was astronomical. We didn't qualify for financial aid. We made just enough to be too rich for help and too poor to afford it. I watched other parents tour the campus with their confident smiles and designer handbags, writing checks like it was nothing. Meanwhile, I sold my grandmother's jewelry, cashed in my small retirement savings, and worked extra shifts until my supervisor worried I would collapse from exhaustion. "Don't worry about the money, sweetheart," I told Michael when he expressed guilt about the cost. "Education is the one thing no one can take away from you." 4 years and $80,000 later, he graduated. I was so proud, sitting in that enormous auditorium in my best dress, the navy blue one I wore to church and job interviews and school conferences. Robert was there too, using a cane by then, but beaming with pride. Michael walked across that stage like he owned the world. Did he thank us? Did he acknowledge the sacrifice? In his speech to his fraternity brothers that night, he talked about his own hard work, his own determination, his own bright future. We were footnotes in his story of success. Susan's wedding cost $35,000. I know the exact amount because I paid for most of it. She wanted the dress from Kleinfeld, the venue in the Hamptons, the photographer who had shot celebrities. "It's my special day, Mom," she would say whenever I suggested something more modest. I've dreamed about this since I was little. I worked overtime for 2 years to make her dreams come true. I developed arthritis in my hands from the repetitive motions at the packaging plant where I had taken a second job. My joints swelled so badly some nights that I couldn't hold a pen to write checks for the vendors. But I did it anyway, because isn't that what mothers do? The thank you speech at the reception mentioned everyone. Her new in-laws, her college friends, her sorority sisters, the weather, the band, the flowers. Robert and I got a brief nod as the parents who made this possible, as if we were contractors rather than the people who had poured their life savings into making her fairy tale come true. When the grandchildren started coming, I became the built-in babysitter. Not the beloved grandmother who got to spoil and return them. The unpaid childcare provider who was expected to be available whenever needed. Sarah's daycare cost $1,200 a month, Susan explained. Could I just watch her on Tuesdays and Thursdays? It would save so much money. Tuesdays and Thursdays became Monday through Friday when Susan decided to go back to work full-time. My own retirement plans evaporated as I found myself chasing a toddler around my apartment, child-proofing cabinets I hadn't opened in years, replacing my quiet mornings with Sesame Street and Goldfish crackers. "Mom, you're so good with kids," Susan would say, as if this was a compliment rather than a life sentence. Sarah loves her grandma time. Did Sarah love it? Or had she simply learned, as children do, that Grandma's house was where she got parked when everyone else was too busy. I loved her desperately, but I also mourned the grandmother I never got to be, the one who could say no, who could have her own schedule, who could spoil rather than discipline. Michael's twins came next, Emma and Jake, born 6 weeks premature and requiring constant attention. Linda went back to her job in finance after 12 weeks. Michael's marketing company was too demanding for him to take paternity leave. Guess who became the solution? I was 72, dealing with my own health issues. High blood pressure, the beginning of osteoporosis, chronic fatigue that I hid from everyone. But every morning at 6:30, I took the bus to their house in Forest Hills. I fed the babies, changed diapers, did laundry, prepared meals, and somehow maintained my own household whenever I dragged myself home at night. The financial demands never stopped growing. Michael's mortgage payment, Susan's car repairs, Christmas presents for everyone because it wouldn't be fair if the kids didn't have anything from Grandma. School supplies, sport equipment, summer camp fees, family vacations I wasn't invited to but somehow helped fund. I kept a notebook, pages and pages of loans that were never repaid, expenses I covered, money that disappeared into my children's lives like water into sand. When Robert died 5 years ago, they inherited nothing because everything had already been given away. The life insurance money that was supposed to secure my old age had been spent on their emergencies, their dreams, their comfortable lives. At the funeral, they both spoke beautifully about their father. Michael talked about the lessons Robert taught him about hard work and integrity. Susan shared memories of bedtime stories and weekend adventures. They painted a picture of a devoted family man who had lived a rich, full life. They never mentioned that he died worried about money. They never talked about how he worked until his body gave out, because we couldn't afford for him to stop. They never acknowledged that his rich, full life had been spent entirely in service to other people's dreams. But I convinced myself their gratitude was understood, even if unspoken. I told myself that family doesn't keep score, that love is its own reward, that someday they would appreciate everything I had done. I was still telling myself these lies when I fell in my kitchen and discovered how little I mattered when they had other priorities. The surgery went well, the doctor said. Pins and screws would hold my hip together while the bone healed. I would need physical therapy, assistance with daily activities, someone to check on me regularly. The social worker asked again about my emergency contacts, my support system, my family. They're very busy people, I found myself saying, as if their absence was something to be proud of rather than ashamed of. Successful careers, young families, you understand. She nodded politely, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or pity. How many times had she heard variations of this same story? Michael did come to the hospital, eventually. 3 days after my surgery, he appeared in my room carrying a small bouquet of carnations from the gift shop downstairs. Still in his work clothes, checking his phone every few minutes, clearly marking time until he could leave without feeling guilty. "How are you feeling, Mom?" "Better. The pain medication helps." Good. Listen, Linda wanted me to ask, when you get home, do you think you can still watch the twins on Thursday? Her mother is visiting her sister in Florida, so we don't really have backup. I stared at him. My 76-year-old body was held together with metal hardware. I couldn't walk without a walker. I was taking medications that made me dizzy and nauseous, and he was asking if I could return to my unpaid job as soon as possible. "Michael, I can't even get to my own bathroom right now." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Right, of course. I just thought maybe in a few weeks when you're feeling stronger." "Maybe. We'll see." But inside, something was shifting. Something cold and clear was crystallizing in my chest. I had spent 50 years saying yes to everything they asked. Yes to the money, yes to the time, yes to my own dreams being perpetually deferred. What had all that agreement bought me? a son who saw my medical emergency as an inconvenience to his social calendar. Susan visited once, bringing a fruit basket that I couldn't eat because the pain medications made everything taste like metal. She sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair, scrolling through her phone and making small talk about her yoga instructor's philosophy and her book club's latest selection. "The house is going to feel so empty without Dad," I said, hoping to connect with her about something real. "Oh, Mom, you need to start thinking about downsizing anyway. That apartment is way too big for just you, and Queens is getting so expensive. Have you looked into senior housing? Some of them are really nice now, like little communities with activities and everything." Senior housing, translation, somewhere I could be warehoused with other inconvenient elderly people, so my family wouldn't have to think about me anymore. "I've lived in that apartment for 43 years. "I know, but doesn't it make sense to be somewhere with people your own age, where someone can help if you fall again?" "If you fall again. Not when you come visit, not when we check on you. When you fall again, because clearly I would be falling alone next time too." The recovery was brutal. Movements that used to be automatic became monumental challenges. Getting dressed took 40 minutes. Showering required a plastic chair and a handheld nozzle and more energy than I used to spend on a full day of housework. The physical therapy was painful, and progress was measured in tiny increments. Today I could walk to the mailbox, tomorrow maybe to the corner. But the hardest part was the silence. My phone, which used to ring constantly with requests and demands, barely made a sound. No one needed anything from me because I had nothing left to give. The twins were now in expensive daycare that Michael complained about but somehow afforded. Susan hired a cleaning service and started getting her groceries delivered. Life went on without me perfectly well. I began to understand that my value to my family had been entirely transactional. I was useful as long as I could provide free labor and financial assistance. Once I became the one who needed help, I became invisible. The loneliness was crushing. I would sit by my window, looking down at the street, watching people walk past with purpose and destination. Teenagers heading to school, parents pushing strollers, elderly couples helping each other navigate the uneven sidewalk. Everyone belonged somewhere, was needed by someone, mattered to somebody. Except me. My 76th birthday came 8 weeks after the surgery. I had been looking forward to it, imagining maybe a small celebration. The family gathered around to mark not just another year of life, but my recovery, my survival of something that could have killed me. I waited all day for the phone to ring. At 4 in the afternoon, Susan sent a text message. "Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry we're so swamped today. Rain check on dinner? XO." Michael's message came an hour later. "Hope you have a great day. Talk soon." That was it. The sum total of acknowledgement for 76 years of existence, 50 years of motherhood, a lifetime of sacrifice and service and love. I sat in my recliner, the one piece of furniture that didn't hurt my recovering hip, and cried. Not the gentle tears of sadness, but the harsh, angry sobs of someone who finally understands they have been played for a fool. That night, I called them both. "I need to talk to you," I told Michael. "Both of you. Together." "Is everything okay, Mom? You sound upset." "I am upset. Can you come over tomorrow evening? Both of you?" "Well, I have that client dinner. And Linda has her Pilates class." "Cancel it." Something in my voice must have registered because he didn't argue. "Okay, yeah, we'll be there." The conversation I had been avoiding for decades was finally going to happen. I spent the entire day preparing what I wanted to say, how I wanted to say it, what I needed them to understand. I cleaned the apartment as best I could, made coffee, set out the good cups, the ones we saved for special occasions that never came often enough. They arrived together, looking worried and slightly inconvenienced. Susan had her gym bag with her, clearly planning to leave as soon as possible. Michael kept checking his phone. "Sit down," I said. They sat on my old couch, looking like children summoned to the principal's office. I want to talk about my birthday. Oh, Mom, we're really sorry about that, Susan jumped in quickly. It was just such a crazy day, and we thought we could do something this weekend instead. I want to talk about the last 50 years. They looked confused. I want to talk about every dollar I gave you, every hour I watched your children, every sacrifice I made, every time I put your needs before my own health, my own happiness, my own future. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Mom, we're grateful for everything you've done. Are you? The question hung in the air like smoke. Are you grateful? Because when I broke my hip and called you in agony, scared and alone, you told me to send a message if I died. When I was in the hospital, you asked if I could still babysit your children. When it was my birthday, the first birthday since your father's death, the first birthday after I nearly died, you both forgot. We didn't forget, Susan protested. We were just busy, yes. You're always busy when it comes to me. But never too busy to ask for money, never too busy to ask for favors, never too busy to expect me to solve your problems and fund your dreams. I pulled out the notebook I had been keeping, pages and pages of records. $47,000, I said. That's what I've given you both over the past 10 years. Not including the free childcare, the college tuition, the wedding, the down payment help, the everyday expenses I've covered. $47,000 that Robert and I saved for our retirement, for emergencies, for a future that we never got to see. They sat in stunned silence. I worked until I was 74 because we kept giving our money away. Your father worked until his body broke because we couldn't afford for him to stop. And what did we get in return? Grandchildren we barely see except when you need a babysitter? Children who can't be bothered to visit when we're sick? A family that treats us like an ATM instead of human beings. That's not fair, Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time either of you called just to check on me? Not to ask for something, not because you needed a favor, but just because you wondered how I was doing? Neither of them answered. When was the last time you invited me to dinner at your house? When was the last time you included me in your plans? When was the last time you made me feel like I mattered to you as a person rather than as a resource? Susan started to cry. Quiet, guilty tears that might have moved me once but now just felt manipulative. We love you, Mom, she whispered. Do you? Or do you love what I can do for you? I stood up, my hip protesting but my back straight. I'm 76 years old. I have maybe 10 or 15 good years left if I'm lucky. I refuse to spend them being treated like hired help by my own children. What does that mean? Michael asked, though I think he already knew. It means the bank is closed. No more loans, no more gifts, no more emergency bailouts. It means no more free babysitting unless it's because I want to spend time with my grandchildren, not because you need a favor. It means you need to decide whether you want a relationship with me or just access to my services. You're being ridiculous, Michael said, his tone hardening. Family helps family. That's how it works. Family does help family, both ways, with love and respect and consideration, not just when it's convenient. I moved toward the door, the universal signal that the conversation was over. I need time to think about what kind of relationship we have and what kind of relationship I want moving forward. Maybe you should think about that too. They left in confusion and anger, arguing between themselves in the hallway about what had gotten into me, whose fault this was, how unreasonable I was being. I listened to their voices fade as they waited for the elevator, already strategizing about how to handle their suddenly non-compliant mother. For the first time in decades, I didn't care what they thought about me. The next few weeks were the loneliest of my life, and also the most peaceful. My phone didn't ring with demands and requests. No one needed me to solve their problems or fund their emergencies. I was completely alone with myself, maybe for the first time since I was 19 years old. It was terrifying. I had defined myself as a mother, a giver, a solver of problems for so long that I didn't know who I was when no one needed anything from me. I wandered around my apartment like a ghost, picking up books I had never had time to read, looking at an easel Robert had bought me years ago that I had never touched, staring at travel brochures I had collected but never acted on. Who was Dorothy when she wasn't taking care of everyone else? I started small. I read an entire book in one sitting, something I hadn't done in 30 years. I watched movies I wanted to see instead of cartoons and Disney films. I bought groceries for one person and cooked meals I enjoyed instead of kid-friendly foods. I took baths in the middle of the afternoon just because the hot water felt good on my healing bones. It felt selfish and strange and wonderful, but the hardest part was the anger. Once I stopped making excuses for my children's behavior, once I stopped rationalizing their neglect as busyness or their demands as family loyalty, I had to face the truth. They had been using me. For years. Maybe decades. The evidence was overwhelming once I stopped looking away from it. The way they called only when they needed something. The way they made plans around me instead of with me. The way they had assigned me the role of family servant and expected me to be grateful for the privilege. I was angry at them, but I was angrier at myself for allowing it, for enabling it, for mistaking exploitation for love, for teaching them that my worth was measured by my usefulness rather than my humanity. 3 weeks into my self-imposed exile from family drama, my neighbor Mrs. Martinez knocked on my door. She was holding a pot of homemade soup and wearing the concerned expression I had seen through her peephole the day I fell. "Mija," she said in her warm Puerto Rican accent. "You okay? I don't see you much lately." Mrs. Martinez and I had been hallway acquaintances for years, the kind of neighbors who smiled and nodded but never really connected. She was about my age, a widow like me, though her husband had died much more recently. I had meant to offer condolences but had been too buried in my own family obligations to reach out. "I'm fine, thank you. Just recovering. From the fall? Or from something else?" Her insight surprised me. I invited her in, and she made herself comfortable at my kitchen table like she belonged there. "You want to talk about it?" she asked. And suddenly, I did. I told her everything. The phone call, the birthday, the decades of financial exploitation, the realization that my children saw me as a resource rather than a person. She listened without judgment, nodding in recognition at parts of my story that clearly resonated with her own experience. "My daughter lives in California," she said when I finished. "She calls every Sunday, but it's always about her divorce, her job stress, her problems with her ex-husband. I listen for an hour and then she says she has to go. Never asks how I am. Never asks about my life. Do you think we raised them to be this way? Maybe. We gave them everything, so they learned to expect everything, but that doesn't mean we have to keep giving it." Mrs. Martinez, Carmen, she told me to call her, started coming by regularly. We would drink coffee and talk about our lives, our disappointments, our dreams. She had been a teacher for 35 years, loved salsa dancing, wanted to visit Spain someday. She was funny and smart and had opinions about everything from local politics to telenovelas. I realized I had been so busy being a mother and grandmother that I had forgotten how to be a friend. Through Carmen, I met other women in the building, other neighbors I had nodded to for years without really seeing. Maria from 3B, who made the most incredible empanadas and was learning to paint. Elena from the first floor, who grew herbs on the fire escape and knew everything about everyone in a 6-block radius. Rose, the Italian grandmother who still made her own pasta and told stories that made us cry with laughter. We started meeting every Thursday afternoon, just an informal gathering in the building's small courtyard, weather permitting, or in someone's apartment when it was cold. We called ourselves the Thursday Ladies, though we were really just lonely women who had found each other. For the first time in decades, I had friends. People who enjoyed my company for its own sake, who didn't need anything from me beyond conversation and companionship. People who shared their own stories and listened to mine, people who saw me as Dorothy, not as Mom or Grandma or Wallet. It was revolutionary. Michael called 6 weeks after our confrontation. His voice was carefully neutral, like he was following a script someone had helped him write. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling?" "I'm fine, thank you." "Good. That's good. Listen, we were hoping you might want to come to dinner Sunday. Linda's making that roast you like." It was an olive branch, I knew, a tentative attempt to restore the old dynamic without actually acknowledging what had been wrong with it. "That's very kind, but I have plans." "Plans?" I could hear the surprise in his voice. When had I ever had plans that didn't revolve around their schedules? "I'm having dinner with friends." "Oh, well, maybe next weekend?" "Maybe. I'll let you know." There was a long pause. He was probably trying to figure out what invisible rules had changed, how to navigate this new version of his mother, who had opinions and boundaries and a social calendar. "Are you still mad at us?" The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't expect it, but because of the assumption behind it, that I was throwing some kind of temporary tantrum that would eventually pass, returning us to the comfortable status quo. "I'm not mad, Michael. I'm different." "Different how?" "I'm not available for the relationship we used to have. If you want a new kind of relationship, we can talk about what that might look like." "I don't understand why everything has to change." "Because the old way wasn't working for me." Another pause. "The twins ask about you. Emma keeps asking when Grandma is coming over." It was emotional blackmail, barely disguised, using my love for my grandchildren to manipulate me back into service. "Tell Emma I love her. Tell her Grandma is learning how to take better care of herself so she can be a better grandma. She's 4, Mom. She doesn't understand therapy speak." "Then tell her in whatever words work for a 4-year-old, but don't use her to make me feel guilty for setting boundaries." The conversation ended awkwardly, with promises to talk again soon that we both knew weren't entirely sincere. I felt sad, but also oddly proud of myself. I had held firm without being cruel, set boundaries without burning bridges. Whether they chose to respect those boundaries remained to be seen. Susan was less diplomatic in her approach. She showed up unannounced on a Saturday morning, clearly hoping to catch me in a moment of weakness. "Mom, this is ridiculous," she said, pushing past me into the apartment. "You're punishing us for caring about you." "Caring about me?" "Yes. We worry about you all the time. Living alone in this old building, getting older, having accidents. We think you should be somewhere safer." There it was again, the suggestion that I needed to be relocated for my own good, conveniently solving their problem of having an aging mother who required attention. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just not allowing myself to be taken advantage of anymore. Taken advantage of? Mom, we're family. Families help each other. Yes, they do, both ways. When did you last help me with something? She looked genuinely confused by the question, as if the concept of me needing help that wasn't related to her convenience had never occurred to her. We helped you after your surgery. You visited me once in the hospital and asked when I could babysit again. That's not... We were concerned about you. Were you? Or were you concerned about disruption to your routine? I could see her getting frustrated, falling back on old patterns of manipulation that had always worked before. I don't understand what's gotten into you. Ever since Dad died, you've been different. Maybe you should talk to someone professional about your grief. It was masterfully done, reframing my newfound backbone as a symptom of mental illness, something to be treated rather than respected. My grief is not the problem, Susan. My grief taught me that life is short, and I don't want to waste what's left of mine being treated poorly by people who claim to love me. We do love you. Then show me. Not with words, but with actions. Call me because you want to talk to me, not because you need something. Include me in your life because you enjoy my company, not because you need free labor. Treat me like a person whose feelings matter, not like an appliance that exists for your convenience." She left angry, muttering about how I was being impossible and unreasonable. But I noticed she didn't argue with my specific points. She didn't deny that their contact with me was primarily transactional. She just didn't like that I had noticed. The real test came a month later, when Michael called in a panic. "Mom, we have an emergency. Linda's father had a heart attack and we need to fly to Phoenix immediately. Can you watch the twins, please? We don't have anyone else." It was exactly the kind of crisis that would have sent me rushing over in the past, no questions asked, my own needs forgotten in the face of their urgency. "I'm sorry about Linda's father," I said, and I meant it. "How long would you need me to watch them?" 3 days, maybe 4. I know it's a lot to ask." "It is a lot to ask, and I can't do it." "What do you mean you can't do it?" "I mean I can't and won't watch your children for 4 days with no notice while you deal with your emergency. That's not grandma duty. That's parenting duty." "But Mom, we don't have—" "You have options. You have money for emergency childcare. Linda has friends. You have friends. Figure it out like other adults do." "Are you seriously going to let your grandchildren suffer because you're having some kind of midlife crisis?" The accusation stung because it was designed to. But I had learned to recognize manipulation when I heard it. My grandchildren won't suffer from spending a few days with qualified childcare providers. They might even enjoy meeting new people and having new experiences. "This is crazy, Mom. You love those kids." "I do love them. That's exactly why I won't continue modeling for them that grandmothers exist to solve everyone else's problems. I want them to grow up knowing that elderly people deserve respect and consideration, not just utility." He hung up on me. Later, I learned through Carmen, who had developed an impressive neighborhood intelligence network, that they had hired a nanny service and managed the crisis just fine. Linda's father recovered. The twins had apparently enjoyed their temporary caregiver, who played games they had never seen before and taught them songs in Spanish. No one died from my refusal to drop everything and solve their problem. But something in me felt like it was dying. The old Dorothy who defined herself through sacrifice and service. I mourned her sometimes. That woman who found purpose in being needed, even if that need was exploitative. She had been exhausted and unappreciated, but she had never been uncertain about her role in the world. This new Dorothy was still figuring herself out. The transformation wasn't just internal. I started making changes to my physical environment too, reclaiming spaces that had been colonized by my family's needs. The guest bedroom that had been permanently set up as a nursery was converted into an art studio. I bought real art supplies, good paper, quality paints, brushes that weren't from the dollar store. I signed up for a watercolor class at the senior center and discovered I had an eye for color and composition. My first painting was terrible, a lopsided bowl of fruit that looked like it was melting, but it was mine. I had created something for the pure joy of creation, not because anyone needed it from me. The second painting was better. The third showed real promise. By the 10th, I was starting to see glimpses of real talent. "You should enter the Senior Center Art Show," Carmen suggested one Thursday afternoon as she admired my latest attempt. A street scene from our neighborhood, painted from memory and affection. "Oh no, I'm not good enough for that." "Says who? You're better than half the people I see selling paintings in the park." The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. When was the last time I had done something just for myself? Something that might fail. Something that might succeed. When had I last taken a risk that wasn't calculated entirely around other people's needs? I entered 3 paintings in the show. They didn't win any prizes, but they were displayed for a month in the senior center lobby with little placards that said, "Dorothy Martinez, local artist." Every time I saw those placards, I felt a flutter of pride and possibility. Local artist, not caregiver, not financial resource, not problem solver. Artist. Who knew? The relationship with my children remained strained, but not severed. Michael would call occasionally, awkward conversations where we made small talk and carefully avoided mentioning the ways our dynamic had changed. Susan sent occasional text messages, photos of her daughter, updates about her job, safe topics that didn't require emotional investment from either of us. It felt like a Cold War, everyone waiting to see who would blink first. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Emma, my 4-year-old granddaughter. She called me one evening, having convinced her father to dial my number. "Grandma Dorothy, I miss you." My heart cracked open. "I miss you too, sweetheart. Daddy says you're sick, and that's why you can't come play with us anymore." I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar surge of anger at Michael's oversimplification. But Emma was 4. She deserved honesty at her level, not adult drama. "I'm not sick, honey. I'm just learning how to take better care of myself. Like when you're learning to tie your shoes or ride a bike. Sometimes you have to practice new things." "What are you learning?" "I'm learning how to paint pictures, and how to make new friends, and how to say no when people ask me to do things that are too hard for me." "Can I see your pictures? Would you like that?" "Yes? Can I come visit and see them?" I looked around my apartment, my peaceful, reclaimed space that no longer constantly accommodated other people's chaos. I thought about the Thursday ladies, who would probably love to meet Emma. I thought about my art supplies, which a curious child might enjoy exploring. Yes, you can come visit, but just you and Mommy or Daddy, not for babysitting, for visiting. To spend time together because we love each other. What's the difference? When people visit, everyone gets to have fun. When people babysit, only some people get to have fun. She didn't entirely understand, but she agreed enthusiastically to a visit. I could hear Michael in the background, probably trying to figure out how to turn this into free childcare for a few hours. But when they came the following Saturday, something was different. Michael stayed. He looked around my apartment with curiosity rather than judgment, noticing the changes I had made, the paintings on the walls, the fresh flowers on the table. "You've been busy," he said. "Yes, I have." Emma was enchanted by my art supplies and spent an hour creating her own masterpiece, a rainbow-colored house with stick figure people standing outside. She chattered about school and her friends and showed me a loose tooth that was driving her crazy. For the first time in years, I felt like we were having a real visit rather than a transaction. Emma was here because she wanted to see me. Michael was present and engaged rather than distracted by his phone. No one asked me for money or favors or solutions to their problems. It was lovely. As they were getting ready to leave, Michael lingered by the door. "Mom, I know things have been weird between us lately." "That's one way to put it. I've been thinking about what you said, about respect and other stuff." I waited. "Maybe we could try having dinner again sometime. Just dinner, I don't know. Not asking you for anything, just spending time together. I would like that." "Okay. I'll call you next week. I'll answer if I'm free." It was a small step, but it felt significant. Not a return to the old patterns, but maybe the beginning of something new. Susan took longer to come around. Her pride was more wounded, her sense of entitlement more entrenched. But eventually, she began sending longer text messages, asking questions about my life rather than just providing updates about hers. "How's your art class going?" she asked one day. "Really well. I'm working on a landscape piece now." "That's great. I'd love to see it sometime." "You're welcome to come over. I could make lunch." It was a small invitation, but she accepted. The visit was slightly awkward. We were both navigating unfamiliar territory without the old scripts of her needing something and me providing it. But she admired my paintings genuinely, and we talked about things I was reading, places I was thinking of visiting, friends I had made. For the first time in years, I felt like she saw me as a complete person rather than just her mother. It wasn't a complete transformation. They both still struggled with the boundary changes, occasionally testing to see if I would revert to my old patterns. Susan once casually mentioned that she was short on rent money, waiting to see if I would offer to help. Michael called one morning asking if I could pick up the twins from school because his meeting was running late. Each time, I held firm but kind. I offered emotional support about Susan's financial stress without offering financial solutions. I helped Michael brainstorm alternatives for childcare pickup without becoming his backup plan. It was exhausting in a different way than the old pattern had been. Instead of physical exhaustion from doing too much, it was emotional exhaustion from constant vigilance about my own boundaries. But it was also empowering. I was finally parenting my adult children instead of enabling them. The Thursday ladies became my anchors during this transition. They understood the complexities of family relationships, the difficulty of changing patterns that had been decades in the making. Carmen was dealing with similar issues with her daughter in California. Maria was navigating her own struggles with an entitled son. Elena had completely estranged herself from one of her children over financial exploitation. We shared strategies, offered support, celebrated small victories, and commiserated over setbacks. None of us had perfect solutions, but we all had each other. "Family isn't just about blood," Rose said one Thursday, as we sat in the courtyard watching the sun set over Queens. "It's about people who choose to love and respect each other." I looked around at these women who had become so important to me, their weathered hands holding coffee cups, their lined faces animated with conversation, their generous hearts that had somehow found room for one more friend despite years of disappointment. They were right. This was family too. The kind I had chosen and that had chosen me back. My relationship with my biological family continued to evolve slowly. Michael and Linda began including me in plans occasionally, not as free labor, but as company. We went to a movie together, had dinner at a restaurant where no one expected me to cook or clean up, attended Emma and Jake's soccer games where I got to be the cheering grandmother rather than the designated snack provider. Susan started calling more regularly, conversations that were increasingly about mutual interest rather than one-sided need. She told me about her work, her problems with her landlord, her anxiety about her daughter starting school. I told her about my paintings, my friends, books I was reading, places I wanted to visit. We were learning how to be adults together, rather than trapped in the parent-child dynamic that had defined our relationship for 4 decades. The grandchildren remained the easiest part of the new dynamic. Emma and Jake loved coming to visit my art house, as they called it. They would spend hours with my supplies, creating elaborate projects while I worked on my own pieces. We would have tea parties with real tea and cookies I had actually enjoyed making for them rather than being obligated to provide. They began to see me as a person with interests and talents rather than just a service provider. Emma started bringing me drawings from school. Jake told his class about his artistic grandmother. They were learning that relationships could be based on mutual affection and shared interests rather than need and obligation. It gave me hope that they might grow up to have healthier relationships with their own future families. As my first year of boundary setting drew to a close, I looked back on the changes with amazement. The woman who had lain on her kitchen floor, desperate for help from children who saw her as disposable, felt like a different person entirely. I had friends who celebrated my birthday with a surprise party, complete with handmade cards and a cake Carmen had baked from scratch. I had artistic pursuits that challenged and excited me. I had a social calendar that required an actual calendar to keep track of. I had money in my savings account for the first time in decades because I wasn't constantly bailing other people out of financial emergencies. Most importantly, I had self-respect. The phone call that had started it all, Michael telling me to text him if I died, still stung when I remembered it, but the sting had changed from the sharp pain of betrayal to the dull ache of a lesson learned. That phone call had been the catalyst I needed to finally see clearly, to stop making excuses for unacceptable behavior, to value myself enough to demand better treatment. In a strange way, I was almost grateful for it. Almost. I still lived in the same apartment in Queens, but it felt completely different. The walls held my paintings instead of old family photos that made me sad. The room served my interests instead of accommodating everyone else's needs. The silence was peaceful instead of lonely, because I had chosen it and could break it whenever I wanted by calling a friend or walking to the senior center or taking myself out to dinner. For the first time in my adult life, I was living for myself. It wasn't selfish. It was necessary. You can't pour love from an empty cup, as Carmen liked to say. By learning to fill my own cup first, I had more genuine love to offer the people who deserved it. My relationships with my children were shorter now, but more honest. My relationships with my grandchildren were less frequent but more meaningful. My relationships with my friends were deeper and more reciprocal than anything I had experienced in decades. I was becoming the woman I might have been if I had learned earlier in life that my worth wasn't measured by my usefulness to other people. Some mornings I would wake up and lie in bed for a few extra minutes, marveling at the quiet contentment I felt. No urgent demands waiting for my attention, no problems to solve before I could tend to my own needs, no guilt about choices I was making or boundaries I was setting. Just peace. The woman who had sacrificed herself piece by piece for 50 years was finally, at 77, learning how to live. Spring arrived in Queens with the usual fanfare of flowering trees and warmer air and general neighborhood awakening from winter hibernation. I had been planning a trip, my first real vacation in over a decade. Carmen and I were going to visit her sister in Puerto Rico for a week. We had been planning it for months, comparing flights and hotels and making lists of things we wanted to see and do. It felt revolutionary, this idea of traveling for pleasure rather than obligation. When had I last gone somewhere because I wanted to, rather than because someone needed me there? The trip was scheduled for late April. 2 weeks before departure, Michael called. "Mom, I hate to ask, but would it be possible for you to postpone your trip? Linda's mother is having surgery and we really need help with the twins." A year ago, I would have canceled my plans immediately. I would have absorbed the financial loss of non-refundable tickets and deposits, swallowed my disappointment, and rearranged my life around their emergency. This time I felt sad for Linda's mother, but clear about my response. "I'm sorry to hear she's having surgery. I hope it goes well. But I can't postpone my trip." Can't or won't? Both. I made a commitment to my friend and to myself. You'll need to find another solution. "Mom, this is family." "So am I. And I'm finally treating myself like family too." He was quiet for a moment, processing this new reality where his convenience wasn't my top priority. "We'll figure something out," he said finally. And for the first time, he didn't sound angry about it. Just resigned to the fact that I was no longer his automatic backup plan. They did figure it out. Linda's sister took a few days off work. They hired a babysitter for the hours when no family was available. The twins adapted to the temporary routine without trauma. Life went on without my martyrdom. Puerto Rico was magnificent. Carmen and I stayed in a small hotel in Old San Juan, walking cobblestone streets and eating incredible food and listening to music that seemed to pour from every window and doorway. I painted watercolors of colonial buildings and tropical flowers, capturing colors I had never seen in Queens. We danced salsa with patient local men who didn't care that we were old and out of practice. We laughed until our sides hurt and shared stories and dreams I had never voiced outside my own head. For 7 days, I was just Dorothy. Not mom, not grandma, not problem solver or financial resource. Just a woman experiencing joy and freedom with a dear friend who had chosen to share her vacation with me. I came back to New York renewed and even more committed to this new life I was building. The changes in my family relationships continued to deepen and stabilize. My children had adjusted to the new boundaries, mostly. They had learned to ask rather than demand, to plan rather than assume my availability, to offer rather than expect. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension when old patterns tried to resurface. But there was also genuine progress. Michael began calling occasionally just to chat, sharing stories about work, or asking for my opinion on things that mattered to him. Susan invited me to her book club as a guest, proudly introducing me as her artist mother. The grandchildren continued to visit regularly, and these visits had become highlights of my week, genuine relationship building rather than obligatory childcare. More importantly, I had learned to trust my own judgment about what felt healthy and what didn't. I could distinguish between reasonable family interdependence and exploitative family dynamics. I could offer help when I chose to without feeling obligated to solve every problem. I could receive love without paying for it with endless service. 18 months after my hip surgery, I was a different person living a different life. The Thursday Ladies had expanded to include new members, Rose's neighbor Anna, who was learning English and needed friendship more than grammar lessons, Mrs. Kim from the corner apartment, who made the most amazing Korean barbecue and told fascinating stories about her childhood in Seoul, my newest friend Janet, a retired professor who had moved to Queens to be closer to her grandchildren and was struggling with many of the same family dynamics I had navigated. We were a genuine community now, women who had found each other in the later chapters of our lives and decided to write new stories together. We celebrated each other's birthdays and holidays. We supported each other through health scares and family crises. We shared resources and recipes and recommendations for everything from doctors to hair salons to the best places to buy fresh flowers. Most importantly, we had created a space where we could be ourselves completely, not versions of ourselves designed to please or accommodate or serve other people's needs, but our authentic, complicated, interesting selves. I had never experienced anything like it. My art had also continued to develop. I was now exhibiting regularly in local shows, had sold several pieces, and was even teaching occasional classes at the senior center. Students would come to learn watercolor technique, but they often left with more than artistic skills. They left with permission to pursue their own interests, to value their own talents, to see themselves as people worthy of investment and development. "You're not just teaching painting," Carmen observed one day. "You're teaching self-respect." She was right. Every time I encouraged a student to trust their artistic instincts, every time I praised their courage in trying something new, every time I reminded them that they didn't have to create art for anyone else's approval, I was sharing the lessons I had learned about valuing myself. It was deeply fulfilling work, this business of helping other people discover their worth. On a Tuesday afternoon in September, almost 2 years after my fall, I was setting up for an art class when my phone rang. Michael's number appeared on the screen, and I felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that his calls still sometimes produced. Was this going to be a request wrapped in emergency language? A demand disguised as concern? "Hi, Mom. How are you?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just getting ready for my art class." "That's great. Listen, I was wondering, would you like to have dinner with us on Friday? Linda's trying a new recipe and we thought it might be fun to have you over." The invitation was simple and genuine. No hidden agenda, no request for favors, no expectation that I would provide anything beyond my company. "That sounds lovely. What time?" 7? "And Mom, could you maybe bring one of your paintings? Emma keeps talking about wanting to show me your latest work, and I realized I haven't seen any of your art in a while." I smiled, remembering a time when my children only noticed my activities if they somehow inconvenienced them. "I'd be happy to bring something to show you." Friday evening was delightful. Linda had indeed tried a new recipe, a complicated pasta dish that was delicious and clearly represented significant effort. Michael was present and engaged, asking thoughtful questions about my art classes and my friends. Emma and Jake spent dinner describing elaborate plans for projects they wanted to create next time they visited my art house. After dinner, I showed them my latest painting, a street scene from our Puerto Rico trip that captured the golden light of late afternoon on colonial buildings. They studied it with genuine interest and enthusiasm. "Mom, this is really good," Michael said, and I could hear surprise in his voice. "I mean, I knew you were painting, but I didn't realize how good you had gotten." "It's been nearly 2 years of regular practice." 2 years? He shook his head. "I guess I haven't been paying attention to how much time has passed since things changed between us." It was the closest he had come to acknowledging the painful transition we had all gone through. "Change takes time," I said. "For everyone." That evening felt like a milestone, not a return to old patterns, but a celebration of new ones. We were learning how to be a family based on mutual respect rather than obligation, on genuine affection rather than transactional need. It wasn't the family I had started with, but it was the family we were becoming. And that felt like enough. As autumn deepened into winter, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The fall that broke my hip had also broken open a life that had become too small, too constrained by other people's expectations and my own fears. From that phone call, "Just send me a message if she passes away," I had learned that I deserved better than being treated as disposable. I had learned that respect isn't automatically given based on relationship titles. It has to be maintained through consistent behavior. I had learned that it's never too late to change patterns that aren't working, even patterns that have defined entire decades. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth as a human being wasn't dependent on my usefulness to other people. The Thursday ladies were planning our holiday celebration, a potluck dinner in the community room downstairs, with music and dancing and gift exchange. Carmen was coordinating musical entertainment with several of her salsa dancing friends. Maria was organizing a group art project where we would each contribute to a large collaborative painting. Elena was handling decorations with her usual flair for color and drama. I was providing dessert and my own special contribution, handwritten cards for each woman thanking her for the specific ways she had enriched my life over the past 2 years. These women had witnessed my transformation and supported every step of it. They had celebrated my victories and commiserated with my setbacks. They had shown me what healthy relationships looked like: reciprocal, respectful, based on genuine affection rather than need or habit. They had saved my life in ways that had nothing to do with medical intervention and everything to do with human connection. On the evening of our party, as I looked around at these remarkable women sharing food and stories and laughter, I thought about the woman I had been 2 years ago. That Dorothy lying on the kitchen floor, desperate for help that never came, convinced that her value was measured entirely by her ability to serve others. That woman couldn't have imagined this life, these friendships, this artistic fulfillment, this sense of purpose that had nothing to do with sacrifice and everything to do with choice. She couldn't have imagined a family dinner where she was invited as a guest rather than expected as service provider. She couldn't have imagined traveling for pleasure, creating art for joy, saying no without guilt, saying yes without obligation. She couldn't have imagined feeling valuable simply for being herself. But that woman had always existed inside me, waiting for permission to emerge. The fall didn't create her. It just finally gave her space to breathe. Later that night, after the party had ended and I was back in my quiet apartment, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and looked at my reflection. The same face that had stared back at me 2 years ago, but somehow completely different. The eyes were clearer. The expression was calmer. The set of the shoulders was straighter. This was the face of a woman who knew her worth. Outside my window, Queens hummed with its usual symphony of sirens and conversations and distant music. The same sounds that had formed the backdrop to my loneliest nights now felt like a lullaby of belonging. I was part of this community, this complicated urban tapestry of people making lives for themselves in whatever way they could manage. I had finally learned how to make a life for myself, too. My phone sat quietly on the counter. No urgent demands, no late-night crises, no requests disguised as emergencies. Just peaceful silence and the promise that when it did ring, It would be because someone genuinely wanted to connect with me rather than extract something from me. That phone call from Michael 2 years ago had ended one chapter of my life and begun another. The woman who said, "Just send me a message if she passes away," was still my son, and I still loved him. But I no longer organized my life around the possibility that he might need me to solve his problems or fund his emergencies. Instead, I organized my life around the certainty that I deserved to be treated with respect, consideration, and genuine affection. And if people in my life, even my own children, couldn't meet that standard, then they would have to earn their way back to full access rather than assume it as their birthright. It was a hard lesson to learn at 77, but not too late. As I prepared for bed, I thought about tomorrow's plans. Carmen and I were going to the Metropolitan Museum to see a new exhibition of Latin American artists. In the afternoon, I had a painting session scheduled with Janet, who was working on a portrait of her late husband. Evening was free, wonderfully, luxuriously free for whatever I might decide I wanted to do. These were the days I had earned through decades of service to other people's dreams. Now, finally, I was living for my own. The woman who had broken her hip and discovered her worth was sleeping peacefully in Queens, surrounded by art she had created, and friends she had chosen, and family relationships she had rebuilt on her own terms. She was no longer waiting for other people to define her value or validate her existence. She was too busy living to worry about whether anyone might need her to die. The transformation was complete, but the life was just beginning. Have you ever found yourself in a relationship where your worth seemed tied only to what you could give rather than who you are? Have you ever had to rebuild the boundaries with the people who should have loved you unconditionally? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own strength. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe. It helps me continue sharing these difficult but necessary truths and ensures this message reaches someone who desperately needs to hear that they deserve better. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling them to treat you poorly. Sometimes the most generous gift you can give your children is to show them what self-respect looks like. And sometimes the fall that breaks your bones is exactly what you need to break the patterns that were breaking your spirit. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing me not as someone's mother or grandmother or resource, but as Dorothy, a woman who finally learned how to live for herself. That's a lesson worth learning at any age.